Hi, I'm Lynda Peterson. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be painting a winter sunset scene. I will be explaining the materials and techniques I use as I go along. I'm using the palette pad, and I have the colors squeezed out in the order of the color wheel. These are the brushes I will be using. I have paper towel set out so that I can dab extra water off the brush just to control the water. I'm going to start the painting with this biggest brush, and this is a blending brush. It's got softer bristles and a bigger area. I've dipped it in the water and dabbed off the excess water. We'll start out with some white, with a little bit of yellow in it. Very light. I'm starting with the sun. I have a rough sketch on the canvas, very light, so that it doesn't show through the paint. And I'm going to add a little of this orange and a little bit of red. This is quite bright, a little yellow. Add more white just to lighten it up a bit. I'm going around the sun, and I'm overlapping the area that's going to be the trees because I want to put the trees on top of the sky. Next, I'm going to mix the top of the sky color, which is going to be a sort of a purpley blue. I haven't washed out my brush. You may notice I don't really wash my brush very often unless I'm doing a complete color change, but this is going to be blended into the top, so I just go ahead and mix it without cleaning my brush. And I'm going to paint across the top, and I always paint the edges so that we can hang the painting without a frame. It's a nice clean look. Now I've dipped into some more white to lighten this and blend it. I want this to be very soft. Now I'm going to dip back into my yellow and orange, my pale color, to blend these two together. This is kind of dried out, so I'm going to blend those together a little bit more. As I'm painting, you may notice I'm kind of going back and forth into a little bit of an X pattern. It keeps the painting from becoming too static, one direction or the other, and gives that a little bit more blended, softer look. Okay, so I've got this line here. I'm going to wipe this paint off and go into my white with a little bit of the orange, lighter. See how that blends that together? When you're painting this painting, and especially in this background part, don't stress about getting it perfect, because it's surprising how little bit you'll actually notice all the individual little things of the sky and the background when you get the entire painting done. Much of it just sort of disappears. I'm going to add a little bit of cloud look there. Just a little hint. Very soft. The next step I'm going to do is the mid-ground, which is the trees that are in the background. Not as far back as the sky, but not the foreground. So for that, I'm going to mix some of this purple, some of the blue, same color that I had in the sky, but I'm going to add some of this brown just to warm it up a bit. Put some on, see what that looks like. It's pretty dark. I'm starting with the bottom area, which will be darker. And as I get to the middle, I'm going to add a little bit more purple to warm it up and a little bit of white. I generally make the background lighter where the sun is shining on it. Okay, now you're going to see the benefits of this brush, this blending brush. It might seem to you that it's pretty splayed out or rough at the end, but there's a reason for that. I'll take this purplish paint on my brush, and if I just go up, it gives a very soft look, which is perfect for distant trees. See how soft that is? With a brush with a very straight edge, you would not be able to do that. Once in a while with this brush, you may find a stray bristle on your painting. It comes off very easily when it's dried. But it's still worth having this brush in the set because it does things that other brushes just can't do. You may notice that I'm in the background that I'm making the outline of the trees irregular. I don't want it straight across. I want it to look natural, which is very uneven when you look in nature. I'm going to touch the tops of these trees with a little bit of this light orangey color, just to show that the sun is hitting tops of those trees. I'm going to make it a little brighter. See what that looks like there. I like that. This is one of my absolute favorite times of day. When the sun is low and going down. Next we'll move into this midground, and I'm going to paint it a little darker than the final painting is going to be because I want there to be shadows. We'll add the light on the snow later with the palette knife. So I'm going to use some of my same colors, a little bit more blue in this background part, and then we'll warm it up with the purple as we come forward. So I'm using blue, purple, and white, and it still has a little of this brown in it because I want this to have a very warm feeling. You notice I'm painting right over the background trees, and that gives us our edge of the snowbanks. Now as I come forward, I'm going to add a little more purple, which is going to warm up the snow tone. This is quite dark. I'll dip right into my white, get a little highlights on the snow. Now I'll put some highlights on the snow with the brush. I'm going to still add it with the palette knife for extra emphasis, but this will give it a soft feel. Now I'm going to wash my brush out. So when I wash the brushes, I just do it back and forth on the bottom to pull the paint out, get the excess water out, and blot it on the paper towel. Then at the end, I wash them all. At this point, I'm going to switch to this next smaller brush, dip it in the water, blot the excess water out, and I'm going to make the sky color that we're going to put onto the river. So I'm going to use white, yellow, some of this orange, very bright, a little bit of the red, and a little more white. Put this in. So as we look at the sky, most of the red or the orangey color is toward the middle. I think I'm actually going to add a little bit more up here, just to make it a little warmer looking, even a little bit back here. When we paint the sky over the background, that's called negative painting. We're painting the space rather than the object. So when we're painting, we are constantly making little adjustments like that. And the great thing about acrylic paint is it's very easy to do that. So I've got this orange added. I'm going to dip into the white, add a little bit of white to soften it. So I don't have very much paint on this brush. I'm just using the very tip of this to blend that a little bit. So I want this color to be a little bit brighter. I like that better. Now I can add more color to the river. So this looks very bright, and it is, but we're going to tone it down. So before, I'm going to darken the river down here, but before I do that, I'm going to dip into my white, and I'm going to put this sun reflection. So I go straight down from the sun and put this light color in. And it's kind of mixing into my wet paint. See how that adds the highlight. We'll add a little bit more coming this way. And here where there would be a shadow, so we'll have a little bit of the light down here. Again, straight down. You can also add a little bit of a highlight here and there in the water. So now I'm going to darken this corner a bit. That's going to bring the focus of the painting up to the back if we darken that corner. So I'm going to add some of this purple, blue, brown mixture. A little bit more water. And you may notice if I start my brush stroke here, do you see how blunt the end of the stroke is? So I go back that way, and do you see how that blends it in more? That gives a more natural look for the ripples. At this point, I'm going to use some of my dark blue. It's phthalo blue, and it's a kind of a greener blue. That mixed with brown makes a wonderful edge of the stream shadow color. And I'm also going to bring it into this water, because it has a little bit nicer color. And when I get that I'm going to use this small flat brush. And I dampened it. I'm going to pull this shadow down. And then add a few ripples. Water reflections go both vertically and horizontally. The vertical is often the reflection, and then the horizontal lines are ripples in the water. So it's interesting that you need both directions to make water look believable. If my brushes have paint on them, I do generally leave them in the water so that the paint doesn't dry out. Okay, so I'm back with this color. I'm going to add some more edge to the river. Again, this softer brush is very nice for blending. These two brushes are better for blending, and then the rest of them are better for detail work. So I'm going to add a little of this orange back into that. It's going to soften this up a little more. Again, I'm trying to keep this bottom of the river a little darker because you can see how it pushes your focus up to the sun and draws you into the picture. At this point, we are going to start the really fun stuff. Okay, so I'm going to use the palette knife and I'm going to put snow highlights. So to use the palette knife, I'm going to take some of this white and make a sort of a flat area so that I can scrape up the paint on the edge of the palette knife. And when I put that on the canvas, I'm going to lay it very gently, just and rather flat, so that I'm sliding the paint off the palette knife. You see how interesting that is? That's why I like the palette knife so much. So I'll put this back up. It gives you a look that you just can't do with a brush. It's an unevenness and a interest. And this might look very sloppy when you start, but then I will clean it up with a brush. Do you see how that adds such a burst of sun to this snow? Okay, so I've got that on with the palette knife. I'm going to clean off my palette knife. I just wipe it on the paper towel, and that doesn't need to go in the water. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my little flat brush, damp, with the water blotted out, and I'm going to soften this. So I'm leaving the top edge of the snow, I'm leaving it with the palette knife edge, and then I'm softening the bottom edge. So I'm going to put some rocks in the stream. It breaks up the edges of the stream a bit, and I'll put there's a little snow cap on each rock. You can either paint the rocks first and put the snow on, or put the snow first and then the rocks, which is what I'm doing here. Okay, a little edge. Add some more edges to this river. So you may notice when I'm painting a river, the curves are not rounded, because when you look at them from this angle, they flatten out. So here it's just horizontal strokes, and that makes it appear that the river is going around a little bend. It's very easy to think that they're going to be like an S, but it's really not an S. It's more of a pointed angle. And that's what's going to make your river lay down rather than, go up to the sky. Now, do you see how these dark corners add a lot of contrast, and they make the river connect to the landscape, connect to the shore of that, and also bring it into a sharper focus. I have another reason for making these edges dark. I want to add a little bit of ice to the edge of the, so I'm still using for this color the dark blue and the brown. I'm going to clean my brush, and I'm going to go in with a little bit more of the orange color, and that's going to blend the dark into the reflected sky color is what it actually is. At this point, we are going to put the trees in. And so I'm using the smallest brush. It's a round with a nice point on it. I'm going to dampen that, and I'm going to use brown and a little bit of purple, and then the dark blue. And I'm going to add a little more water to that so that it's pretty fluid. And then I kind of roll the brush so that the paint comes out to the point. Okay, I'm going to put this brush, you see how I'm holding it up like this? I'll pull it up, and as I'm pulling, I'm going to roll it back and forth, and that's going to give the unevenness of a real tree. So you may want to try this on a piece of paper first, or even right here. Pulling and then rolling back and forth. You see how that gives that unevenness of branches? All right, so we'll just go ahead and start. These are trees, and you don't really know what's going to happen when you're rolling it. It's another one of those things that's actually kind of exciting. Okay, so I want my trees, these are the background trees. I want them to be a little cooler. I'm going to add a little bit of the cerulean blue to that, and more water so that it's nice and fluid. So these are the background trees, so I want them to be a little cooler in color. So to make a color cooler, we add blue or purple. Now I'm going to do some thicker foreground trees, and so I'm going to use a warmer color because warm colors advance and cool colors recede. So I've got this brown, dark brown. I'm going to put a little bit of that dark blue in it, and then some red so that I have a nice warm brown color. And these trees are going to be fatter, so I'm going to, instead of using just the tip of my brush, I'm going to use more of the bristles. So when I put it down, I'll let more of the brush connect. See how that makes a thicker tree? I want that to be a little darker, so I'm going to add a little more of the blue to that. So this warmer brown helps us to know that this tree is closer to us. So now using this same dark brown color, I'm going to put a fallen tree going into the river. So with this tree, I'm going to need a little reflection of or shadow. So the branch is going like this, so it has to go the opposite way. I'll need a little bit of So I'm a bit heavy on the contrast and detail on this side and not as much on this side. So I'm going to add a little bit more contrast and detail to these rocks that are in the river. And do you see how if I put more contrast, all of a sudden they have more visual weight, and it balances the painting better. So again, I'm going to use the palette knife, and we're going to put highlights on these tree trunks and branches so that I have a pale orange color. Again, I'm scraping up an edge on this knife. So this is the edge that's loaded. I'm going to just touch it. This time I'm not going to do it flat. I'm almost doing just the very edge so that it's very thin, touching it. And then we have sun hitting these trees. Another of these sort of magical things that you can do. So one last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little warm highlight on the snow, and I'm going to touch on some of these warmer areas. So I'm going to use the smallest brush again and mix up a color that's the color of the shadow on the snow, which is the blue, purple, and a little brown to warm it up. And some white to make it lighter. So when you have shadows on snow, of course the shadow happens in the sunny area. So we start at the base of the thing that's leaving the shadow, and we go into the shadow and blend it into the shadow. And the other thing when you're doing shadows on trees, the angle is kind of important. So I go to the middle of the sun into the base of the tree, and I start the shadow there, and I do it in that angle. So right here, I do it kind of in that, I'm going over the lump of snow, but I'm that angle. So the tree over here, I go to the base of the tree, and then this is the angle of the shadow. There wouldn't be shadow there because that is in shadow, but then this. So this tree, middle of the sun, this is the angle. That makes your shadows much more believable. Thank you for joining me for this winter river scene. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.